I want to first say a huge shout out to my co-presenters who have put in a lot of work to get this presentation sort of exceed expectations when we started to prepare for this. My co-presenters are Janis Yee. Janis is a superstar chief resident at University of Washington, and she's going into, unfortunately, breast imaging. I tried to entice her to stay into abdominal imaging, but and she's moving to UCLA where her family is. So best of luck to you, Janis, in your new endeavors when you start, but you'll surely be missed. Chris Walker. Chris Walker is a former UW superstar resident as well, but now is at University of Kansas. He's a professor of radiology and a famous cardiothoracic radiologist. The three of us share a mutual interest in this personal finance topic that is very important to us. And I think we want to share our stories and what we've learned with you all. We're not trying to cover everything. The goal of this webinar is to give you sort of an outline to get you started, and we'll do some polling questions so that everybody gets a sense for where we are in this personal finance journey. And if you're doing well, it'll be reassuring. If you're a little bit behind, we're hoping that this will be an impetus for you to maybe put in a little bit more work and pay attention in this area. The idea is we're not collecting any personal information. The poll will be anonymized, and then we'll segue into the discussion session. If you have any questions that come up as we discuss this topic, please put them in the chat box. Janis is monitoring the chat, and we'll take them at the very end. The first order of business, disclosure. So none of us have any personal finance companies, websites, blogs, or any products we're going to sell. Things we're going to say as part of this discussion are opinions of speakers. They do not represent official position of the AUR. But the idea here is to give you some general principles in this topic and really get you started. And I always tell people when I discuss this topic that if you're smart enough to learn LIRADs, BIRADs, any of these complicated things, personal finance shouldn't be that hard, because this topic is actually rather simple and it's very repetitive. So some repetition that you'll see from the speakers is by design, because we want to harp on some of the important things as we go through. So the goal for the next hour is to help you understand what a net worth really means, and how to get this net worth mentality to figure out where you are in your financial journey, and if you're doing well, or maybe you need to catch up, just get a sense for where you are. The second thing is to have like a cash flow approach. Like this is what you do at the micro level. Like, so every month in your personal finance journey, you have to take stock and say, well, how did I do this month? Am I investing enough for my future? And that is sort of the cash flow, which basically means how much you earned minus how much you spent for that month. And then we're going to talk about a financial independence number. So it's hard to undertake a journey if you don't really have an end post. So having a number in mind, I personally think is very helpful, so that you can see that, you're this short, or maybe these many years short, or this number short of hitting your target, which means that essentially you would have a decent retirement even if you stopped working. So that's what we mean by personal financial independence number. So the first thing that I want to say is that don't be afraid of making mistakes. So when we start out, just like in our radiology training, we make mistakes, we learn, we're not experts. The same happens here. And as in the next hour, you'll hear different mistakes we all made. I certainly made a fair amount of mistakes when I started out. When I was, in my first month as an attending, I brought a brand new SUV. And as you learn more about this topic, you realize that brand new expensive cars are not great investments, but I did that. And then when I put together a down payment for our first small condo for the family, I had some money to invest, and I bought lots of Apple stocks. And so my investments were very concentrated. I wasn't diversified at all. And then, you know, I worked in radiology from when where we used to have films. So I thought Kodak was a great investment, and Kodak eventually became a penny stock and then even stopped existing. So I lost money there. But, you know, my biggest mistake was actually buying an annuity. So a universal or variable life insurance policy that actually had very, very expensive investment mutual funds built in. This was a very expensive policy. And then I had a bad feeling about it. And just like you get a second and third medical opinion from different doctors if you're contemplating surgery or some very, you know, large treatment, I got like second and third finance opinions on this annuity. And everybody told me to like get out of it as quickly as possible. When it was all said and done, I lost about $30,000. And by the time I was done, this was all the money I had because, you know, I really didn't, I was very, very early in my career. So that was my wake-up call where I said, never again. And I always tell this to anybody I tell this story to, that this is the best $30,000 I ever lost, because not only did it wake me up, it actually, I've probably recovered many-fold loss since then, because I started reading book after book after book, and I've saved an investment advisor fee, and I kind of do this on my own. So the first thing that we have to do is get over this idea of domain dependence, right? So we're all doctors. We trained over a decade to become a radiologist. Just because we're an awesome radiologist doesn't mean that we're great in personal finance. So I think we have to be humble about it. We have to say, well, unless you had parents who taught you, or unless, you know, you discuss these topics over dinner every night, we're probably not going to know a lot about this straight out of the gate. So we have to be humble about it. We have to put in a fair amount of reading. You have to read a couple of books, and then you'll see that all the books are pretty much repeating, you know, the same 10 or 15 ideas in different ways. So I think approaching this topic with humility is a good start in saying, I don't know, but I am going to learn. So make that commitment. In fact, things are so bad in this space that doctors are seen as whales, meaning big targets. And these finance advisors, they have to feed their families too, but they call us, you know, this is whale hunting for them, because we're easy, big targets, and you can hunt us down with a spear because we trust these people. And that's the sad part of it, that we're trusting our hard-earned money to these advisors and paying them, you know, between 1% to 2%, which really adds up, and I'll show you the numbers. So I think if you were to go with an advisor, go with a fee-only advisor who charges you an hourly rate, but eventually set a goal for being able to do most of this yourself. It can be done. One of the biggest things that makes a difference in your financial outlook, and Chris will talk more about it, and Chris and I have been talking about it for years, is that where you decide to live has a huge difference in where you end up financially at the end of your career. So people who live in high cost of living areas like Seattle, LA, compared to Kansas and other low cost of living areas, we spend so much money in real estate. These places are very expensive to live. Sometimes some states have really high taxes that your cash flow situation might be dramatically different, even though you may have the same salary. And I know of friends who live in low cost of living areas who have lower salaries than me, end up saving a whole lot more. So if you have a choice, if you're just graduating, if you're a resident, or maybe if you're looking to relocate mid-career, all things being the same, a low cost of living area will likely improve your financial outlook quite a bit. I swear by this Boogleheads model of investing. This is sort of named after John Bogle. which focuses on not buying individual stocks, but sort of investing in the market, not timing the market, but spending more time in the market. Dollar cost averaging, using very, very low cost index funds, and putting your money in understanding the tax code a little bit, and putting all the dividend paying investments in tax sheltered accounts, and keeping it simple, and just repeating it, so that every month you're spending no more than 5 or 10 minutes investing your money and just getting on with your life. Now, the beauty of low cost index funds is that when you in investment, there's a saying that you save, you keep what you save, basically. So if you're paying less fees, and the fees of mutual funds that I think is a good fee is 0.05% or so, like really, really low. But it's not uncommon to find mutual funds that have several percent fee, either declared or sometimes even hidden. So finding these low cost mutual funds, I think Vanguard is a good company. Schwab has good low cost mutual funds. Fidelity is pretty good. I have no association with any of these companies, but as long as you find a low cost mutual fund over the course of your career, these savings add up to massive numbers. But if you paid 2% to a financial advisor, and they call this AUM, assets under management fee. If you paid them 2% every year, at the end of your career, you'll end up paying 40% to them. So you can see that, you know, there's a huge incentive in being able to do most of this yourself. If you need a little bit of help, you know, pay somebody for an hour. So this table is from this blog called Mr. Money Mustache. And if you just Google the simple math behind early retirement, like this is like the most, I think, brilliant blog piece that I think on this topic on the web. And he's run some numbers, and he says that if you actually are able to save 60% of your income, you can actually be done with all of your savings in 12 and a half years. Now, it's not uncommon for people to say, well, just save 15% and that's fine. Well, 15%, you'll hit your financial independence number in 43 years. Now you can see if you start at 35, you know, how long you have to work. It's a depressing thought. So the higher you save at the end of the month of your income, the quicker you can hit your personal finance numbers. I tend to think of money in 3 different colors. So you have your taxable account, you have your tax deferred account, and then you have your tax-free accounts, which is basically you've put in the money, you've paid your taxes up front, and that's why you have limitations in terms of Roth IRAs, and some employers are now offering Roth 401ks, and that's something to consider. And you can do the backdoor Roth IRA too. So you can just Google it and you'll find blogs where people show you a step-by-step approach. But you've got to figure out, you know, where you're going to put your money. And you have to do this about once in your lifetime, and then just make sure that you're not paying huge taxes on the dividends. So when I started out, I found it pretty paralyzing to design a portfolio allocation model. So I'm just giving out my allocation model in this middle table. This is how I invest. It's not important to have an amazing allocation model as long as you're able to stick to it. So regardless of what the market does, you should be able to stick to this allocation model. And that's how this model works, because these models are designed to make you buy low and sell high. So for example, in the last year or so, small cap funds have done really badly, but in the last 1 or 2 years, they've done phenomenally well. So when they were doing badly, you kind of buy them, and then they give you returns based on, you know, when they pick up, then it's time for you to sell and rebalance. So that's kind of how it works. I want to give you this really awesome tool that's available on the web for free. It's called FAUR Calc. It's a FAUR calculator. And all you have to do is plug in these numbers. You know, what's your annual spending? And everybody should know that. What is your portfolio worth? And how many years do you sort of plan to spend in retirements? And you click submit. And what it does is it generates this model where, depending on what what the stock market has done in the past, it uses those numbers to predict the future. Now, of course, that's not going to be true, but it gives you a pretty good idea for what target you're spending, what the target that you're setting, if that's going to work out for you or not. So I really like this FAUR calculator. Now, the thing to know about the stock market is that the stock market over the long horizon, 20 to 30 years, always produces returns. Now, even at 10 years, sometimes even at 20 years, you may end up lower than the amount of money. So you may be even losing money at 20 years. But if you go over the long horizon, over the course of your career, the big picture is you'll end up doing just fine. So just as long as you remember that and don't sell when it gets rough in the market, that's kind of the way to do this. Another thing that I highly recommend everyone doing is writing down an investor policy statement. What that means is, what is your philosophy about investing and what are you going to do when the market gets rough? Because you're going to have an emotional response when you see 6-digit dollars, maybe even 7-digit dollars, depending on where you are in your financial journey, just vanish from 20 to 30% correction. And then people start doing crazy things and then they ruin their financial outlook. So having this written, there's plenty of them out there, just knowing where you want to be, how aggressive you want to be, and what you're going to do when it gets rough will help you. So I think that financial independence is a potential burnout antidote, because once you hit those numbers, you will start to say, well, why am I working so hard? Can I work less? Can I actually have the courage to negotiate? Do I really need to be employed full time? How much time am I spending with family? How can I increase that? And you'll have more money to indulge in your personal hobbies, travel, etc. We don't have time to get into the benefits of side hustles and how the tax code is favored for small businesses, but Janis, who's on the panel, has written this beautiful article, which you might want to check out and read more about that topic. And then so it all comes down to these 4 things. You want to make sure that you're insured appropriately. So that is protecting your downside, and we'll talk more about that in the next hour. You want to make sure that you have enough money in the taxable account, because that's the account you want to empty or dig into first in retirement. You want to make sure you're tax optimized, and if you have the potential to earn 1099 income and take advantage of the small business tax code in the United States, then that's something you should totally consider. These are 2 of my favorite books. I think personal finance is as much finance as it is psychology. I loved reading I Will Teach You to Be Rich, because it gives you a weekly sort of goals to accomplish and tells you all the things that you have to do. It has lots of stories. And Your Money or Your Life talks about when you fix the relationship with your money, and it tells you that a lot of millionaires in America are not going around driving fancy cars. They're actually regular people who have indulged in significant savings. So those are two great books, and I want to leave you with this idea that when you think about personal finance, you should have a net worth mentality. You should have a plan for your downside. How are you going to protect your assets? So how are you insured? And all of that. And then every month, think about cash flow. Janis is going to talk about the importance of investing early and how to get a head start on this and how to make compounding work for you, because Albert Einstein said that compounding is I forget the exact code, but compounding is the most amazing thing, or is a wonder or something like that. And then, with the increased prevalence of burnout, with the crazy volumes we're reading every day, once you hit your financial independence number, think about how you can modify your job so that you prioritize wellness and not just randomly earning more money. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Walker.
Hopefully you guys can share my screen. Thank you to the AUR for allowing us to speak on this very important topic. So like Puneet, I kind of wasn't all that interested in finances at first. When I, going through residency, going in my fellowship, I really didn't have any interest whatsoever about learning about personal finance. I started getting calls during my fellowship about financial advisors wanting to kind of take me on for free. Just remember, there really isn't anything free in life. And most of these things will end up costing you more in the end. And it's this story in particular that really got me interested about personal finances. So my father-in-law and mother-in-law decided to cash out a whole life policy of all things that they had on my wife. And they gave this investment money, this $10,000 that they had, and they decided to put it into one of our kids' 529 accounts, which is a savings account that you can use for college. And not knowing much about this, we just went with their advisor that they typically used. And when I got the first statement, I was a little confused because, I looked, they had given us $10,000, but at that first statement, I only saw that $9,450 was actually invested. And I decided to read a little bit more about this, and I found out that we were actually put into something called a actively loaded mutual fund, where essentially in order to get into this mutual fund, they charge a commission right off the bat to actually use this mutual fund. Through more reading, I learned that these actively managed mutual funds, because of their really high fees, because they often have expense ratios that are much higher than these index funds that just kind of follow the market that Puneet had mentioned, it takes a lot of overperformance to actually have these be beneficial. And the truth is, you really can't find a actively managed mutual fund that over the long term is going to beat the index funds. Less than 5-10% of them over the long term will actually beat these index mutual funds. And so this really kind of spurred me on to learn more about personal finance. Sorry about that. And so this led me to kind of developing these rules of investing that I kind of hold dear to this day. And a lot of us think that we can beat the market. The truth is we really can't beat the market. So it's better to just invest in the market. That being said, a lot of us still feel the need to invest in individual stocks. And rule number one is if you do decide to invest in these individual stocks, try to limit it to no more than 5 to 10% of your total portfolio. Rule number two is to invest mainly in bond and stock index mutual funds, not actively managed funds. And so again, that being that these actively managed funds where the pickers try to pick the stocks that are going to outperform the index, the truth is it's really hard to do that over the long term. And so by using these index funds or these passively managed funds, you're able to have a lower expense ratio and therefore you're able to save more money in the long run. Rule number three, similar to what Puneet had mentioned, was pick a reasonable asset allocation. And the most important thing is to stick to it. Try not to bounce in and out of the market. The worst thing that you can do is try to do something called performance chasing, where you're buying the next up and coming thing. If you do that, you're going to end up buying high and selling low. So really just pick an asset allocation and stick to it. And then rule number four is to invest at least 20% of your gross income for retirement and start as early as you can. If you would like to retire at an earlier age, you really need to be investing more than 20% of your gross income for retirement, but at the very minimum, shoot for 20%. When you're looking at your portfolio, it's often hard to try to pick a portfolio. The way to think about this is though, to look at your portfolio across all accounts. So if you have a significant other and you manage your money together, really consider all of your accounts as one big account. These are three of the more popular portfolios. The three-fund portfolio is kind of pioneered by the Bogle heads, who are those followers of Jack Bogle, the founder of Vanguard. And what a lot of them recommend investing in is a three-fund portfolio consisting of the total US stock market index. And so all of the major companies, Vanguard, Schwab, Fidelity, have a different total US stock market index. And what you're doing with this is you're essentially buying all of the publicly traded companies in the United States. A portion of your assets would be invested in the total international stock market index. So you essentially own all the international companies in the world. And then third, you have a total bond market index, which holds a selection of bonds. If you're interested in real estate, people often add a real estate portion to their portfolio, be it in the form of an index fund like a REIT, or potentially private real estate that you may invest in. And then some people just don't want to think about it. And if you're in that group where you just don't want to think about investing, a target date fund is actually pretty good for most people. If you're interested in reading about more about this, however, there's this great article on the White Coat Investor entitled 150 Portfolios Better Than Yours. And the truth is, we don't really know which is going to be the best portfolio, but the important thing is to pick one of them and really stick to it through your entire life. This is what my portfolio looks like. So the vast majority of our investments are through US stocks, mainly through the total stock market index or the S&P 500 index, which is the 500 largest companies. We have a sizable international investment of about 20%. We still have about 10% of our investments in bonds. We do some real estate investing, mainly in the form of REITs and some crowdfunded real estate. Because I am a gambler at heart, I do like to pick a little bit of individual stocks at about 5% of my investments. So what can you actually invest in? And so this is the usual investment vehicles that are available to people who are employed physicians. And so at least for the year 2021, most of us can invest up to $19,500 per year for a 403B or a 401k. You have a little bit of catch-up contributions once you get into your 50s where you can invest more money. A lot of people have a 457 account available to them where they can invest another $19,500 per year. Something called a backdoor Roth IRA that you should be familiar with, especially to high income earners. This allows us to contribute money to a Roth IRA indirectly through the back door, which has been a legal maneuver that's been here for the past decade or so. And so you can do this for $6,000 per year for yourself. You can also put money in for a non-working spouse of $6,000 per year. If you're interested in learning about that, just search backdoor Roth IRA White Coat Investor, and it has kind of a detailed walkthrough of how to do this. The health savings account is referred to as a stealth IRA by a lot of individuals. This allows you to save money for healthcare, but most health savings account actually allow you to invest that money. And so the way we use our HSA is we actually invest it with the thought being that we will use this money later on for healthcare. So this is really triple tax advantaged. So you get a tax break up front. The money is going to grow tax-free until you use it. And then as long as you use it for healthcare expenses, which a lot of us will have quite a few healthcare expenses in our lifetime, it'll be tax-free on the way out. And then finally, as Puneet mentioned, you can also invest over and above this $58,000 that each of us can invest through a taxable brokerage account. And this is really unlimited investments. So a taxable account is kind of a bad name. But the way to think about this is you take your post-tax money, so you get your paycheck, and any money that you don't use on expenses, and say you've done your fun things for the month, you can actually take that money and put it into investments. So there's no limit on this. The great thing about a taxable account is the gains from these investments are taxed more favorably than your ordinary W-2 income, assuming that you hold those investments for at least a year. The other thing is all of these, so if you look at the total stock market index, which again is the large collection of all the companies that are publicly traded in the United States, these companies will give out portions of their profit in the form of dividends. And so with the total stock market index, usually about 2% of the value is going to be given out in dividends each year. And those dividends are also taxed more favorably than income from your job. And so this is a way to kind of beef up your savings, get to that 20% or maybe more if you're under the 20% where you can't get it through tax advantage accounts. It's through with a taxable account. So then the big question people often have is, when can you actually retire? How do you kind of think about that? Puneet mentioned this a little bit with that excellent post, The Simple Path to Early Retirement. And the truth is, it all depends on how much you spend per year. I think a lot of people don't really have a sense of how much they spend each month. And this is something to kind of get a sense of, over the course of the year, what is your typical spending? Because if you find out how much you spend, it really helps determine when you can actually retire. A lot of calculators, if you look on the internet, will say, well, you need 80% of your income before you're comfortable to retire. You need to, replace 80% of your income. So for a lot of radiologists, you know, if you earn between $400,000 and $500,000, you're not necessarily going to need that. What you actually need is how much do you actually spend in a year. And so this is based off of a safe withdrawal rate study that was done at Trinity University, and it was from, you know, whenever back in the 90s, they kind of coded this the Trinity study because of where it was performed. And what this study looked at was different withdrawal rates. And what they found was in people that were invested mainly in equities that had a certain bond percentage, you could usually get away with having a 4% withdrawal rate. And at the end of 30 years, most of the people would have money left over in that portfolio. And that was found to be a safe withdrawal rate. And so this has kind of led to this rule of thumb, is the 4% rule of thumb. Importantly, this was adjusted upwards each year to inflation. And again, for most of the time periods, they looked historically at different time periods, kind of as Puneet had shown. You know, if you withdrew 4% of your portfolio each year, would you still have money left at the end of 30 years? That was determined successful. So if you decide that you want to retire at an earlier age, you probably want to err on the side of caution and have a lower withdrawal rate than 4%. Thinking about this another way, so once you have 25 times your annual spending, you can be considered financially independent. So the way to think about this is if you spend $80,000 a year, or if you need $80,000 to live, you'd expect you'd need a portfolio of around $2 million to have that 4% safe withdrawal rate. If you needed $120,000 to live or $160,000 a year to live, you would need more money in that portfolio to sustain that safe withdrawal rate. So 3 million and 4 million. And so this is kind of a way to get a sense of how much money do I actually need in my retirement accounts, in my taxable brokerage account, to be able to successfully retire. And this is kind of where that 4% rule comes into play. And remember too, that this doesn't really take into account a few things such as taxes. It also doesn't take into account Social Security, which I imagine will look a lot different in the next 20 to 30 years, but I can't imagine it going away entirely. So this is kind of an added buffer to that 4% rule. And so that is all I have. So I'm going to turn it over to Janis, who will be talking about more early career physicians.
Thanks, Chris. And thank you, Puneet, for starting us off. Let me just get my slides up. So now that we've reached just the 2/3 mark of this presentation, we're going to do some polling just to see how everyone's feeling about their personal financial situation right now. So if you want to join the poll everywhere, we have the response page open. You can either join on the website or text to join. And this is just a word cloud generator, so we'll see what comes in. All right, looks like the poll is working. Okay, there's a couple of different responses here. Comfortable, solid, broke, Bitcoin, interesting. All right, growing, I like that. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide here. All right, so my presentation is really focusing on what you can do early on in your career or as a resident. I bring this book up because this is something I remember my dad reading a lot when I was younger. Like most immigrants, when he came to the US, he was not coming from a very financially wealthy or stable background and was really looking for a better life. And so he read a lot of books like these just to try and educate himself and also to educate me and my brother growing up on how to be savvy with our money and how to make it really work for us instead of the other way around. So, you know, there are a lot of lessons that I learned from my dad that I'm really thankful for. He and my mom, when I was growing up, they really instilled in us the importance of protecting your assets, like building a good foundation. As in high school, they even opened up some credit cards for us, paid off the balance every month for us to start building a good credit score. something that, I don't think a lot of kids get taught about. And then in college, when I had my first job, they actually opened a Roth IRA for me, and then they encouraged me to invest in that. And actually, with the amount of money that I made, was able to invest up to the limit for that year. And really, that just started me off on my own personal finance journey. So going to med school, everyone knows it's really expensive. I am in, the 84% of graduates that have a lot of debt from going to medical school. I went to a private medical school where after 4 years, my tuition bills racked up to be about $250,000. These are some statistics taken from the AAMC fact card from 2020. Basically, it's showing that all medical student debt keeps rising each year, and a lot of medical students graduate with also having credit card debt, which is really unfortunate. And I was also in that spot too. Not graduating from medical school with credit card debt, but when I moved here from Los Angeles after my intern year, I actually incurred quite a few moving costs, and we didn't have like a moving stipend, so I had to put some of that money on a credit card coming up just to pay for the cost of the move. So I ended up paying that off, but that taught me an important lesson about making sure that my balance is paid every month, because that's a really big source of interest. So for me, my financial checklist as a resident, I do things like paying myself first each month and automating my expenses. So I don't miss any of the cash that's actually not coming into my account. So I usually maximize my 403B employer match. For us, that's 5%. That's matched by the university. I also try to max out my Roth IRA contributions each year. That works out to be about 10%, and then for my total income for the year. And then I also try to have an emergency fund. For me, that's a savings account. That depends on how much people are comfortable with. Savings accounts don't really have a lot of high interest growth with it, but I am relatively risk averse, so I'd rather keep my money where I know it's safe. So I usually put 5% into an emergency fund. And then I make a budget with what's left over. So I do have federal loans that I need to pay. I'm on an income-based repayment plan, so I pay down some of that debt every month. And then I recently, over the past year, had bought into disability and life insurance. I'm getting married soon and planning on starting a family, so I thought life insurance would be a good idea. I underwrote them at the same time as a young person, just so that I wouldn't have to go through the whole process again. Essentials such as like rent, utilities, obviously that's a big part of the budget, and then whatever's left over, then I spend on that. So I talked a little bit about the type of income-based repayment plan that I use. So for me, I'm not entirely sure what my career plans are after this, if I'm going to stay in the public sector or go private. For those who are interested in staying in academics or working for a nonprofit or university that is under the public service loan forgiveness, there is a possibility of getting any of the loans that aren't paid after 120 qualifying payments under the IVR plan to get removed and basically written off. Otherwise, you can also, if you're not planning on going into the public sector, you can refinance with a private lender to try and get a lower interest rate. Obviously, if you do this, you're not eligible for the public service loan forgiveness after that. A lot of places say that there's a caveat that a lot of public service loan forgiveness programs don't actually end up working in favor of the person who's trying to apply for it. I think there's a lot of things that you have to go through in order to make sure that it works properly. And it's also based on the whim of Congress. So if it's possible to try and hedge by saving an amount equivalent to the loans in an investment account, just to make sure that all your bases are covered when it comes time to pay back your loans. So for me, having recently bought disability insurance about a year ago, really it was on my to-do list. And then when the pandemic sort of hit at the early stages, I knew that this was something I probably should get in on just to be safe. I know a lot of us were being redeployed. And with all the symptoms I was hearing about COVID and the long haul symptoms, I just wanted to make sure that all my assets and bases were covered. And especially since, being an MD, there's not too much I can do other than radiology outside of my field. So just some general tips: to buy from a highly rated insurance company, use after-tax dollars to purchase, and then keep until financially dependent. And make sure you choose a policy that has a very broad definition of disability and it's subspecialty specific. So I made sure that the person I worked with was very knowledgeable and had worked with physicians before and was aware of that this is the type of policy I wanted. And also just to make sure when you buy disability insurance that you look at the writing very carefully. They often try to upsell you on things. For me, I mentioned that I had loans and they tried to put in a rider that would say that, all my loans would be forgiven if in the case that I became gravely disabled or anything and I wouldn't have any income. But since my loans are federal loans, they will be, taken off in any case, either way. So these are some of the insurance riders that I put on this table, which I thought were worth it or not worth it. So definitely residual disability, basically like subspecialty specific that, if you can't do your own subspecialty, then there's disability that covers it, or it's known as like partial disability. Inflation protection is especially good if you're purchasing your policy early like I am. A future purchase option, so if you are thinking about upgrading to a larger benefit. And then things that might not be worth it are catastrophic disability, and then retirement protection, because those usually are more expensive and they have like an investment portion, which you could just pretty much do yourself without without having to pay someone to do it for you. And then there's just some lessons on life insurance that I learned as well as I was applying for the process and getting underwritten. So for me, because I carry a lot of debt right now as a resident and I'm planning on getting married soon and starting a family, I thought it was a prudent time to invest in life insurance at the same time as my disability. So evaluate if you really need it. It's not for everyone. If you're financially independent or have no dependents, then you might not necessarily need life insurance. Buy term insurance only. Whole life insurance is usually not worth it. And then just cancel your life insurance after financial independence. And then variable insurance also avoid, because it also includes an investing component. And those are my slides. And then I just wanted to open it up to the floor and start a discussion with some more poll questions that we put together. So feel free to answer on our poll everywhere if you'd like. And I'll let Puneet and Chris chime in too if they have anything else to add while we're getting some responses here. But I think this is just a nice gauge of where everyone's at, what people think that their target net worth should be as early career physicians. So we're getting a lot of greater than 3 million answers.
That's really amazing. You guys are incredible savers if you're getting upwards of greater than 3 million.
Yeah, I have to admit I wasn't there at above 3 million less than 10 years.
I think it goes into what Puneet was mentioning, this geographic arbitrage. So obviously if you have family in LA, like all your friends are in LA and you really want to live in LA, you have to realize that you can't have everything. And so you may be spending more on your house. Whereas if, I grew up in the Midwest, and so coming back to the Midwest was very feasible for myself and my family. And therefore, you can, often you actually get paid more in these low cost of living areas. It's kind of silly to think about, but, usually like the San Francisco job actually pays less than, the Kansas job or so forth. So it's kind of something to think about too. That may impact where you actually land. So if you don't get to that greater than 3 million in 10 years, don't feel bad. I think a lot of people do not get there.
Yeah, and also if you look at the if you actually look at the compounding curve, it's actually an exponential curve. So even though you may be at 1.3, when you get compounding growth, it actually picks up very quickly after, after 1 and 3 million, it picks up speed. You'll be amazed sometimes yourself that you look at your investments and you realize that you've made more money with your investments than you made in your job. I think this is excellent.
We have another question.
Yeah, let's move on to the next one.
Okay, so let's move back one. There we go. All right, so for a mid to late career physician, what's your target net worth? And we have a couple different numbers now. All right, maybe we have a couple more early career physicians in the audience than mid to late career physicians, but I think this talk is worthwhile for everybody, and it's really interesting to see the audience responses here. Move on to the next one. All right, and then what's your family's monthly target cash flow? So net income minus expenses.
And when I think about this monthly cash flow, like it's this mini battle that you have to sort of win every month, because you have pressing expenses, especially for those of us who have kids, and house maintenance costs and other things that come up. I think this is where you win this game, where every month you make a commitment that, I just won't go this a certain number, and then you start of questioning yourself if these big expenses are even worth it, or do you need to do them now? Can they wait? And is there any way to, maybe just going with the first offer, just get 3 coats and try to decrease the cost of what it is that you're trying to get done. So very important to look at your cash flow.
I'll move on to the last question. So what is everyone's financial independence goal?
So Janis, would you leave the slide on for a bit so that we can discuss this issue a little bit?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So Chris, I want to ask you this question just as a discussion between somebody who lives in a high cost of living area compared to somebody who lives in a low cost of living area. I have seen some blogs on Physician on Fire's website and other stuff where they talk about, how much, so first is, there are some web-based surveys. I don't know what the accuracy is, but if you go to a blog and you want to see numbers, sometimes you have to put in your numbers before they show you the results. So, and of course, the people who are going to those blogs are financially savvy, but those spit out numbers saying that most physicians actually retired less than 5 million net assets. And there's also blogs that talk about more than $8 or $10 million is an insane amount of money, and most physicians won't get there. What are your thoughts about that, Chris?
Yeah, I think the vast majority of people are probably undersaving. I know a lot of people that I've talked with or people that I work with. They may only be aware of investing in the accounts that are given to them at work, and so they may not even know about a taxable account. And so I think physician financial literacy is pretty low, unfortunately. Hopefully, like with this webinar, we're trying to change that. But still, once you get into your 60s, there's a lot of physicians, that have less than $1 million net worth, which is kind of sad if you think about, earning between $200,000 and $500,000, over a 30-year career. A lot of people still live paycheck to paycheck, And it really depends on, you can have most things, but you can't have everything. I think it goes back to. And so if you want to, really have the nice doctor house, often with that goes a nice doctor car, nice private school, and so forth. You just can't have it all. You can always spend as much money as you make, unfortunately. So I think most people probably do not hit those numbers.
Yeah. So, so what are some tips? Maybe Janis from you and Chris from you, like, what is it that you can do? So let's step back for a second. So the way I envision all of this and how to get to your financial independence goal is think about, let's say, money is like water in a river, right? The river is flowing and you're standing at the bank and you have a bucket, and there's a lot of water in the river, but you can only keep the water that you take out of the bucket, and you're only allowed a sweep into the river like once into the river like once a month or so, right? So every time you get a paycheck, like, is there something that you do that or like something you think about, or any automation hack that you've come up with that you think like, okay, this month I did well, or I just won't spend more than this? Any tips?
Thankfully, I feel like we've gotten to the point, at least when I was starting off, my first couple of years out of fellowship, I really made it a point to pay off our student loans. Financially, mathematically, it probably didn't make sense to do that. My first 2 years of med school, I had locked in at a 2.8% rate. So it didn't really make sense to do that. But, personally, I just feel like having that burden off of my shoulders was very important. And so we ended up paying off our student loans in 2 years. And we got pretty aggressive about our house, actually, too. So we had a decent sized mortgage, at least for here in Kansas, but we had a goal that we would pay that off as well. And so, a little over a year ago, we ended up paying off that as well. And, thankfully, because we live in a low cost of living area, the salaries tend to be higher than they would be on the coast. We were able to do all of these things and still have a pretty good life. And so we didn't really have to budget per se. I think I was somewhat frugal growing up. I think that was kind of passed on to me. So I didn't usually spend a whole lot of money. But, for me personally, our goal, even after having all these things, paid off, our goal is to kind of get to so that we can spend about $120,000 a year. Where if you think about not having a mortgage, not having all these other, debt that you have to service, $120,000 a year is a ton of money, especially in Kansas. And so I would just kind of think about, what is your goal? Like, how much do you want to spend when you're done? Hopefully by the time you retire, you'll have that paid off mortgage. But what is your goal of how much you have to spend? And then just kind of think, use Fire Calc, use one of these other calculators to figure out, how much do I have to save to actually get there so that I can retire at a reasonable age, whatever that may be. Because remember, for a lot of people, things change. You may love your job now, but 10 years from now, who knows what will happen? And who knows if you want to keep working in the same capacity. So having these, this ability to kind of modify how you practice, I think is very beneficial.
Janis, what are your thoughts?
For me as a resident, I haven't, it's hard to think super long term because the amount of money that I'm making right now. So I feel like for me, I try to automate and just put away as much as I can, to reasonably live okay in Seattle, and to, not punish myself if I, have a month that, I'm not as on top of things as I should be. I'm trying to save for a wedding right now too. And so there's just a lot of buckets that I have to, and check boxes that I have to, check off right now. So I think, being flexible at the same time, but trying to at least hit the basics, like maximizing the 403B match and making sure I, that money automatically goes from my paycheck into my retirement savings, and trying to maximize my Roth IRA, things like that are, and then, with my income-based repayment plan, making those minimum payments at least to try and, if I decide to stay in the public sector, to get on that path for public service loan forgiveness. Just try and meet those minimums, but, have a little bit of grace and, because we all fall off the path a little bit sometimes, and I think that's okay. But just to recognize that, you know, these are the steps I should be taking, and that, you know, just having one bad month or a couple bad months here and there where I didn't save as much as I can, doesn't mean I can't get back on the path again. So I think as a resident, that's kind of important to recognize, because we work long hours, we don't make too much. And so it's really hard to be saving, you know, more than 20% or even 20% of our income when we don't have a lot to begin with.
Yeah. Okay, so we only have 3 minutes left. So I want to give, you know, 1 minute to maybe all three of us to like make some, you know, parting comments. The only thing that I want to say is that your future self will thank you for all you're going to do right now. So the way I think about this is in different buckets. So you want to make sure that you're adequately insured. So you have enough disability coverage, and have some on the personal side too. That if you were to not be able to practice radiology for whatever reason, you're still able to support the needs of your family and hopefully be able to still live in the same house that you're living in. And be able to help your kids through school, maybe possibly even college. So protecting your downside, very important, right? You want to set that up. And then as you move towards financial independence, you can actually let go of life insurance policy. So there's no need to have a $3 million policy. You can actually have a laddered policy. You can have three $1 million policies, and you can cancel one each and lock low rates when you're younger. So things like that. There's different crafty ways of doing it. And then once you're done it, like I think, you know, I set a pretty aggressive goal of how much money I want to put in my taxable account, because I know that with the current trend of radiology volume, the pressures are going to be intense going forward. And if, God forbid, if Medicare cuts down some rates for radiology studies that we're reading, especially MRI, we'll be asked to even read more. God knows how AI is going to play out. Like, will that mean that once we have a little bit of help from AI, will the administrators think that this is a lot of help, so you got to double your productivity? I don't know what the future looks like. And I want to have the ability of maybe working part-time early in life and then focus on my passions. But I think the last thing I want to say is that life is not about money. Money is a tool for life. And you want to live your life, and you want to automate this to an extent that you're not spending a lot of time thinking about it. And I set myself like a pretty large financial independence goal, because when I'm retired, I don't want to be checking my bank account every day and making sure that if I have enough or not, and be stressed out about it. So Chris, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I would just say that it's never too late to start. Obviously, the best day to start was 20 years ago. The next best day is today. So if you've kind of had your head in the sand about this, don't feel bad about it. Even if you're in your 50s, 60s, whatever, there's still time. And the second thing is, it's really not a race against anyone else but yourself. So someone may want to, you know, spend $1 million a year, but if you're comfortable living on $80,000 a year, guess what? You just get to retire sooner than that person. So you're not really competing with anyone else. It's just a one-person game, just with yourself. And so just try to figure out how much you spend, try to get a sense of how much you need to retire, and then enjoy life. Don't ever like put off life because of this. And once you hit that savings goal each year, once you've calculated how much you need to hit that savings goal each year, feel free to spend lavishly. If you want that Tesla, go for it. If you want to take that $10,000 vacation, go for it. That's a great thing. Once you hit that savings goal that you've set for yourself each year, don't feel bad about spending the extra money. A lot of people that come on these webinars are probably more interested in finance, and we tend to be more super savers. So don't feel bad about that.
Janis, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think personal finance, we all talk about the finance part, but it's like Chris and how you said, everything is very personalized. So what we're describing here that works for us, you know, just try and, you know, take what we say and kind of figure out what works for you and your situation. I think Chris brought up a really great point that it's just a race against yourself and what your goals are. So I think that's the first part of this whole journey, is to figure out what exactly you want from it.
All right, I
Yeah,
think we're
thank
a
you.
minute above our time, so I want to thank everyone for attending, and special thanks to Chris and Janis to work so much on this and bring this excellent webinar to the AUR members. Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.